Hi. Thank you for attending today's reading. Let's begin. I will tell a story from myself. Child from Russia. I am 12 years old. Studying in the 6th grade. We usually go to 1st grade at 6 to 7. And sometimes at 8 years old. We don't have bears on the street. We don't drink vodka instead of tea. But the economy in Russia is suffering a lot. But we are not backward cavemen. We just sometimes really want to afford something expensive. By breaking stereotypes, we can get to the heart of the story. Once I decided to go to school with a cat. His name is Brand. Keeping animals in Russia is not as difficult as I heard about America. When I brought the cat, I was taken to the director. Of course I didn't bring the cat litter and he doing his toilet chores in the principal's office. I had no choice but to shove the shit under the chair with my foot. And no shit was visible. I breathed a sigh of relief. But realized that it was impossible to breathe deeply. It smelled like shit. I don't want to go into details. But I have to do it so that there are no questions about the traces of shit. Because it was tough. So, luckily there are no traces. The school director had a conversation with me. I was even more focused on the smell of shit than on his voice. I remember only one most important thing. This is that he said that the cat can do poo at school and the cleaner will be unpleasant. To do his job. I understood that I was finished. At that moment the cleaner came in and lifted that very chair. He asked the director where the shit came from. The director replied that he did not even smell the smell and did not suspect that shit was in his office. He looked at me viciously and wanted to shout something out. But I shut him up by saying, "You have a coronavirus. You need to check. Why didn't you smell?" The director's face was filled with fear and thought. He inhaled and exhaled, releasing me from school with a certificate from the nurse. The next week he was temporarily replaced while he was ill. This is how my cat's shit might be useful. End of story. Next story. I wish I could have apologized growing up sheltered. I knew my parents tried their best, but if the first thing you were taught was, "You're a girl so be careful. Don't do this. Be wary. Be cautious," I don't think you would turn out completely balanced either. I wish I didn't have this much trust issue. But I did. And what to do beside wishing things had been different? I think about this relative of mine often. He was a distant uncle who lived in the countryside with his family. Such a small man. Never seemed to stop smiling. The warmest, friendliest, most generous soul you can ever hope to meet. He adored my dad, so in extension our entire family, and whenever we came to visit, he would personally catch the biggest fish from his pond. Treated us such a feast with leftovers for days. Spent all his time showing us around and in the end spoiled us with his homegrown vegetables as parting gifts. My brother and I weren't, and still aren't, that attached to our extended families and relatives. But we loved and respected that uncle. Could not ever be grumpy whenever we visited him. I was a teenager when we decided I was to study abroad. Long, arduous journey to get to that foreign land. Longer, lonelier journey being in said foreign land. My budding depression was in full bloom when I was barely 17. On the second year abroad, I returned home for summer break and my dad decided we would go visit that distant uncle. As usual, we were greeted with love, smiles and a bountiful lunch which my uncle prepared himself. After the meal, my parents were happily napping and I was dozing off myself when my uncle shook me lightly and, still with that ever-constant smile, said to come with him but did not say where. My mind rushed to the worst possible scenario. But I didn't want to alarm my exhausted parents. So I went with him on his scooter. Because how dare you think to refuse your elders in this country? I sat as far back as I could, looking at the rice paddy fields whooshing past me while breaking in cold sweat. He stopped at a small cafe at the edge of the village. The place looked so run down and empty at midday did not help make me feel any better. We sat down. He bought me a drink and started to make small talk. I was stiff, trying to mask my fear but only came out as short, curt answers. My mind kept reeling about all the what-ifs. What to do then? But most of all, please don't hurt me. Then I could tell his smile dimmed. After an hour or so, he took me back to his place unscathed. I felt so shitty right at the moment I saw my uncle visibly saddened by my awful attitude. I felt so shitty on our way back to the city. And I felt like an absolute monster when I was half a world away from home just 3 months later. My dad emailed me that my uncle had passed away. The last I ever saw of him was when I broke his heart. And I have to live with that fact for the rest of my life. I wish I could change what I did but I couldn't. I tried to be a better person but it turned out I couldn't. A good man told me he wanted me to be the final love of his life. I gave him hope when I shouldn't. I thought I could love him back if I tried. But I broke his heart as well. I have never said, "I'm sorry" properly to either of them. For one, I can only apologize to a tombstone now. While for the other, I'm not willing to meddle with my ex's feelings more than I have already done. I wish things had been different. I wish I had been different. If you read this far, thank you. My first time posting in a subreddit. Because I'm the type to reveal my wound in a place where no one knows me. Like that hatter in the fairy tale who screamed into a hole in the ground that the king had donkey ears, just to find some relief. I can breathe a little now. End of story. Next story. Why was I leaving my house in the middle of the night? I bought an outdoor security camera recently on Amazon. The camera was only $40, so I couldn't resist becoming a first-time security camera owner. I installed the camera on top of my front entry door to my house. The camera has a motion sensor and all day it picked up nothing but when I woke up the next morning. I was shocked that I got a message on my phone alerting me that motion was detected. When I reviewed the camera recording that was synced to my phone, I knew right away who this person was because it was me. I could see myself leaving the house at 2 a.m. and coming back at 4:10 a.m. I have zero recollection of ever leaving the house. The camera has me walking towards the town, which is about a 10-minute walk, and not getting into my car. The most disturbing part of the video is when I returned. I had a facial expression that I had never seen before in a mirror or a picture of myself. I had a smile very similar to the Joker but with no makeup on. I rarely drink alcohol, so I couldn't blame it on a blackout. My wife is a deep sleeper. I could have a marching band in the bedroom and she would sleep right through it. There was no medical condition that fit my problem. I should have woken up 100 different times if I was sleepwalking. I could have been doing this for years, or maybe last night was the first time. I am completely perplexed and scared. The image of myself smiling was one of the creepiest images of anybody that I had ever seen. The other part that completely disturbed me was that my sneakers were put back in their rightful place. It might seem trivial, but I knew enough to not only find my sneakers but also return them to the correct bin under the bench. There's a public trail that leads to the town, so I figured that I must have taken that route. The trail is pitch black at night and there are no lights or cameras. I decided to force myself to stay up the next night. I know this is extremely difficult for me because I'm one of those people who passes out at 9 a.m. And up until last night I thought I didn't wake up until 6 a.m. So I did everything possible to stay awake, from pacing to taking cold showers. I managed to stay awake until 2 a.m. and I decided to walk the public trail into town. As I got into town I realized that there was a house where the trail was close to its backyard. There was a man in his 70s that was standing on the back porch with the lights on. I recognized the man as the local museum curator. I hadn't seen this man in over 6 months when he put on a presentation at the museum. I noticed that there were 2 other people who exited the trail in the pitch black and walked up his porch and into his house. The museum curator, Cecil Combs, just stood on the porch with his arms folded as person after person entered his house. The odd thing is that he didn't greet anyone. The people just entered his house as sheep would enter their pen. Everyone on the trail was expressionless. I decided to follow the other people on the trail. I voided myself of any facial expressions and entered his house. The house was a standard 2-story townhouse. The house was sparsely decorated with balloons and a lighted disco ball. Everyone who entered the house put on a party hat and formed a line that encircled the house. The 20 people in the house were void of any expression and were standing about 3 feet apart. It reminded me of watching military movies of roll call being performed. Cecil closed the porch door. He then dimmed the lights and put on an antique player recorder. The house kind of resembled a 1970s disco dance floor with the disco light on. The music was an instrumental upswing jazz type of music. Cecil sat down in a chair and removed his clothes until he was wearing only his brief underwear. Then Cecil got up and danced around the house holding 2 maracas. He went up to each person and would say, "Nice to see you made it," then while continuing to dance. From person to person he would say, "Thank you for coming, nice to see you." Each time he would say this to someone the person would put on that Joker grin. When Cecil was finished dancing around the house all 20 people had Joker grins on their faces. Then Cecil opened the back door and everyone left the house in single-file fashion form with the same joke face. The fear of the moment gripped me, so I followed suit with everyone else and put the Joker face on. I walked back home wondering that was the most bizarre encounter that I had ever taken part in. As I got closer to my house, I was finally able to figure out what was going on. Cecil had hypnotized me when I went to his presentation at the museum. I remember very little of that presentation other than I was the only one who had attended that day's presentation. End of story. That is all for today. If you want to support my automated channel, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.